When you try to think of iconic weapons in video games, quite a few come to mind. You might think of the portal gun, the master sword, maybe the diamond sword from Minecraft, or the blue shell from Mario Kart. But of these weapons, one in particular pops out of our imagination purely because of its infamy: the Gjallarhorn. Despite it coming from Destiny, a game with thousands of weapons, Gjallarhorn alone has been featured in multiple TV ads, other games, and even has made an appearance as a real-life Nerf gun. There are many reasons this gun has become so synonymous with Bungie's MMO FPS successor to Halo, but at its core, Gjallarhorn is so iconic because for quite a time, it was overpowered.
I got.
You get a Gjallarhorn, and you get a Gjallarhorn. Everyone gets a Gjallarhorn.
In a game where the most valuable asset to your team was raw damage, Gjallarhorn sat uncontested as a king in its domain. Where most rocket launchers would fire a single rocket with the trigger pull, Gjallarhorn effectively shot 7. But how much fun would it be if, in order to play Destiny, you had to have Gjallarhorn equipped? While it may sound ridiculous, this is very similar to what happened to 6-player cooperative raid groups and strike groups in Destiny. Because of Gjallarhorn's sheer dominance above every other contender in its class, it artificially inflated the average power level of every player, meaning that in order to be considered average, you had to use Gjallarhorn. But how could a weapon this strong make it into a game? Well, when the weapon was eventually nerfed, no, not that kind of nerfed, Bungie, the creators of Destiny, stated, "If Destiny had a nuke, it would be the Gjallarhorn. We definitely intended to have a high damage heavy weapon that was ideal for PvE destruction. What we did not intend, and what we unfortunately saw, was pick up raid and nightfall groups gating participation based on whether or not players had this weapon." Gjallarhorn was so strong that for many people it had become the only answer to getting through tough encounters, and therefore they were less willing to spend time with other players that didn't have it. We strive for Destiny to be a place where a single weapon or strategy does not dictate how or with whom you spend your time. In the new world, Gjallarhorn will still be worthy of its legacy as an exotic heavy weapon, but we hope it promotes inclusive behavior rather than exclusivity. Bungie saw that the weapon they had created to be intentionally more powerful had gone too far and had become overpowered. But this wasn't the only time in Destiny's history that we witnessed an overpowered weapon.
Battle is still close.
In the December of 2017, a different type of overpowered torched its way into the world of Destiny. Destiny's PvP has always had questionable balance, but there was no doubt in anyone's mind that the Prometheus lens was bugged and was dealing an overpowered amount of damage to everything in its path. Between these two weapons, we see two fascinating sides to the same coin. Both weapons were overpowered, but both were overpowered for different reasons and in different contexts. The Gjallarhorn broke the cooperative PvE side of the game because Bungie slightly but unintentionally overtuned it, while the Prometheus lens broke the competitive PvP side of the game because of a bug in the code. Fixing these weapons put Bungie in a difficult spot. Do you nerf the weapons players have become so in love with and preserve what the intended difficulty and experience of the game was? Or do you let them go wild with it and possibly make players bored long term due to the lack of variety? Moreover, how do you know when a weapon has gone from being just strong to being overpowered? The BFG is another notorious weapon for its strength. High damage room clearing seems to be the perfect option for all of your hell stomping needs, yet no one is clamoring to demand a nerf for it. An overpowered weapon or item typically requires an imbalanced cost to profit ratio. For example, in a game like Enter the Gungeon, a game balanced around a player rarely taking damage, a weapon that clears an entire room would be extremely overpowered unless it also required you to take a guaranteed point of damage with every shot. But identifying what the correct cost to profit ratio is can be tricky. More skillful players will be able to minimize the cost while maximizing profit, and while we will talk about player skill in a bit, even just examining how a player can numerically min-max a piece of gear can help leverage smart decisions on whether something can be overpowered versus whether something is overpowered. And this line of thinking is where designers can do a lot to protect players from ruining the games for themselves by stopping them from optimizing the fun out of a game. Essentially, developers want players to have fun, and most players have fun by winning. But if winning comes at the cost of no longer being fun for one player or another, then the winning strategy may be overpowered. Just like how Gjallarhorn was nerfed because players optimized their encounters to the point of it becoming a necessity. It is difficult, if not impossible, to think of something overpowered without considering the advantage it provides, but it can be hard to draw a clean line between something being overpowered and being just strong, but there is a good method of doing it. Let's pretend we are making a PvP game where players' health is on average 200. If a weapon dealt 80 damage, how many hits would it take to eliminate a player? 3, right? What if another weapon dealt 99 damage? How many hits would it take? Again, 3. Despite this weapon dealing more damage, nothing significant has come about our fight. Assuming everything else about the weapon is the same, it's clearly stronger, but the 80 damage weapon can still compete well enough. Lastly, what about a 100 damage weapon? Suddenly, despite our damage only changing by a single point, our 100 damage weapon is capable of eliminating a player in one less shot. Assuming all other stats are equal, this weapon has gone from being strong to being overpowered. This subtle shift in stats and damage is what I call a breakpoint, and is the invisible factor all players are thinking of whenever they are deciding on what to use and what's best. Using an in-game example, the Ace of Spades is one of, if not the strongest hand cannon to ever exist in Destiny 2. Its combination of great stats and its exotic perk Memento Mori, which allows the player to grant the next 6 shots after a kill extreme bonus damage, has cemented it as the hand cannon of hand cannons. When this perk is active, the headshot damage goes from a normal 70 to 90, and despite this, the Ace of Spades has rarely received any nerfs, and most of the nerfs it has received has been to something other than its damage. Why? Because just like in our example, 90 damage still requires 3 shots to kill a 200 health target, meaning while this weapon is strong, it isn't by itself overpowered, and when it was overpowered, it was from another perk or exotic adding a simple 10 bonus damage to its Memento Mori perk. Think of the strongest item from the last 5 games you played. Maybe you might think of the Superstar from Mario, maybe the Op from CSGO, maybe a Super in Destiny 2. I am willing to wager every item you selected, despite being obviously strong, you probably wouldn't consider overpowered because of how rare or limited they were. Availability and cost are inseparably married to each other, but they are distinct. For example, the Superstar in Mario cost you almost nothing to collect, yet its balance comes from how rare and how temporary it is. It would be a much different discussion if you could somehow keep the Superstar permanently or use a Super in Destiny 2 indefinitely. The same could be said of other games, perhaps like a Battle Royale, where the best possible gear could be taken into another match. How quickly the most powerful weapons would quickly go from just being strong and rare to being obviously overpowered because of how available they are. Jotun has always been one of the top picked weapons in Destiny 2. It's a lot like the grenade launcher in your Call of Duty games, yet despite the community complaints, they have rarely ever been nerfed. Why? These weapons are picked because of how easy they are to be successful with. They are what extra credits described as a foo strategy, or a first order optimal strategy. They net the player a decent amount of success, but they are limited in how effective they can be at the highest of tiers. They never completely fall out of use, but As the average skill of the player involved increases, their effectiveness decreases. It's a balance between skill floor and skill ceiling. A weapon or piece of gear becomes overpowered when a low skill floor, or in other words, how easy a weapon is to pick up, also has an incredibly high skill ceiling, or in other words, how good a weapon can be in the right hands. Skill is such a large topic when it comes to balance, and for the sake of time, we'll have to save it for a future video. But for now, I will leave this off with the idea that a player will always eventually progress to the point of picking the highest skill ceiling and highest rewarding things, regardless of that weapon skill floor.
Zach has to win right here. There's the fourth throw.
Yeah, he definitely needs it because Kumar could get a timeout win.
And you can see him kind of going for it. He's definitely okay.
Oh my God!
Regardless of what context an overpowered weapon is in, someone loses. The easiest example is in a competitive environment where the player on the receiving end might be having less fun because their odds of winning are minimal, or they just spend the whole time waiting for their turn to play the video game. While it may be fun for the player using the overpowered piece of gear, it's at the expense of someone else, and what's worse is that the overpowered item may blur the line between rewarding skill and rewarding luck. And while there is skill in choosing the correct piece of gear, competitive environments are like living creatures. And unless something entirely undiscovered proves itself an equal or stronger contender, every player will eventually evolve into using the overpowered item to stay competitive. Those who can't are left in the dust, or might just quit the game altogether. Cooperative or single player experiences are more subtle in how an overpowered item will ultimately hurt the player. These types of games may even be designed to have moments of awesome, where the player, either through story or through luck, finds something that spikes their power level far beyond average. These can be some of the most memorable moments in gaming history, but they wouldn't exist without something to contrast them from. If you are painting a picture, let's say, and you wanted to use your favorite color purple, you wouldn't want a completely monotone purple screen. Beauty and enjoyment are derived from contrasts. While burritos may be my favorite food, I would quickly grow tired of the same burrito every single day. Unless a player is willing to show self-control or wants to use something creatively in a single-player cooperative game, giving them the most powerful gear destroys the game they are playing as well as the overpowered gear. In other words, beating Minecraft in creative mode is far less fun than in survival. Despite Gjallarhorn being such a powerhouse, it was still incredibly fun to use. Not just because it gave us an entirely new context of power, but because of the infamy and story the gun had. Unless you were one of the lucky few players who picked up the weapon on the second week of Destiny's launch, it was very difficult to get this gun. It was purely a random drop. So when it did drop, players were understandably very excited.
Oh my fucking god! Oh my god! Gjallarhorn!
Oh, I got a Gjallarhorn!
This combination of being hard to acquire yet filled with story is what makes an overpowered weapon work. Getting the Master Sword in Breath of the Wild is such a surreal experience because of how much you have heard about this sword and how difficult it was to finally get. This drive for these moments of story and difficulty is what drives achievement hunters to collect every single Korok seed, or collect every single star, or even speedrun a game to perfection. So in this line of thinking, is it possible for something to be overpowered just because no one cares about it? If there was a weapon that rivaled Gjallarhorn, but was some random common rocket launcher, could it be called overpowered just because it didn't have the mythos? Let me know what your thoughts are below, and feel free to suggest topics for future videos. My name is Misum777 with TDT. Bless your faces, and deuces.
Thank you.